Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. And today I'm joined by special guest Reuven Lerner. Reuven, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you again. It's been a long time. So before we jump in, could you give folks a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I have been freelancing, consulting, whatever you want to call it, since 1995. And I started off like a lot of people in your audience, like a lot of people I know, doing software engineering projects, web development, Unix system administration, a whole slew of different things. And along the way, I was always doing a little bit of training. So companies would ask me to sort of teach their people to do what I was doing rather than doing it myself. And I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, around the time that we started talking more, I realized, wait, all these people I know who I really respect are telling me I should really specialize in one thing and have that, that laser focused marketing statement. And I am saying, well, here are the 10 things I do. What if I were to concentrate on the one thing that I really enjoy most and where I see the biggest opportunity? And that turned out to be training in general and training in Python in particular. And so for, 10, 15 years now, I've been only doing Python training with a little bit of sort of blurry edges there with what we consider Python, such as Git. And that's what I do. So let's call it 2/3, 3/4 of my time is spent doing corporate training, B2B. So I go into companies and teach their people. And the rest, I've had a growing B2C business as well, teaching people online using a variety of different techniques.
Excellent. And thanks for that background. So we're going to talk, I'd like to talk about a lot of different training topics. Since you brought it up already, let's jump back to the sort of state of mind you were in when you were still doing development and thinking about training. How obvious was it to you that training was the thing, if you're going to specialize in something, that was the thing?
So it took a while to realize that it was something I wanted to do. I always enjoyed it. It was always fun for me. And if you're going to get up and speak in front of a group for, let's call it 8 hours a day, and try to be an authority, you have to enjoy that and be willing to do that. And not everyone is. But I also, I guess there were two things I didn't really understand. Number one was I was under the impression that if you're not actively developing software, then you can't credibly be a trainer. That you need to be doing it day after day and then sort of also doing training so you can draw on real world experience. But you don't 100% need to do that. It turns out that you can have that experience in your background, but if you're really good at training, if you're only doing that, then that becomes your specialty. The other mistake I had was I didn't understand the business model of training. I figured, okay, I can develop software or I can train, but it turns out that training is funded by a completely different organization within most companies, and one that pays better and schedules differently. So if you come in and do development, then they're going to talk to you like you're a software engineer and price you as a software engineer. But if you come in to do training, they're going to treat you like a company that does training. And most of those companies have offices and marketing people and salespeople and on and on. And if you're just a one person, the budget they've allocated to training is way higher than you can get as an individual doing software engineering. And so once I sort of dispelled both of these illusions for myself, like it was amazing. And let's add to that icing on the cake that with development projects, they usually can see forward a few months in advance at most. But training, most companies know what they're going to want to need 6 or 12 months in the future. So not only am I getting paid more and I'm not getting bug reports late at night that I have to wake up for,
Yeah.
but I'm suddenly like being able to schedule myself out a year in advance with these high paying clients. So it was quite like the more I did of it, the happier I was. And I did have a transition period in which I was still doing training, but I was doing it through a training company. And that's when I realized, oh, there's a lot of demand for this. I should just do this on my own.
Well, that's a perfect segue into where do you get leads from. But before we go there, I wanted to call out, you said it pays better. I'm sure a lot of people listening want to know more about that. Would you say that, like, on what basis would you say it pays better? Because I know people who are doing six-figure, $500,000, $1 million software projects. I don't think you're getting paid that much for a training gig. So when you say pays better, how do you measure that?
So first of all, it's compared with what I was getting. So it could be like different people get different amounts. And especially if they're applying your techniques, they can do very well for themselves. No doubt about it. That said, and there's a reason why I don't have prices on my website, which is that I price differently for different locales. So I know what I can get away with in Israel, where I live and work most of the time, but I can charge more in Israel. I can charge more in Europe. I can charge even more in the US. So in Israel, I typically charge about $2,500 a day for my training. But in the US, I'm now charging $10,000 a day for my training. It's exactly the same product. But like basically different locales have different expectations for what is considered a normal training rate. Or I should even say a high-end training rate, and sort of the market will bear different amounts of that high end in different places.
Got it. Cool. Okay, so let's get back to that being booked a year in advance, and how do you get these leads? You know, where are they coming from? What are the activities that you do to, you know, show up in the market and present yourself as a credible trainer?
So the first place is just repeat business. That if you work with a big company, they have an almost infinite demand. So like I work with a few Fortune 500 companies, and you know, to do intro Python, advanced Python, like how many groups of 20 can you find in those companies to do that sort of thing? A lot. Um, so that's like the first easiest best thing. And once you get in somewhere, then you can stick with them. A lot of another way is the mere fact that people in high tech move around from place to place a lot. And so sometimes, I mean, whenever someone calls me up and asks me about training, at some point in the conversation, I'll say, well, where did you hear about me? Oh, I forgot to do that at the meeting on Friday. Oh, well, I just realized I had to. But basically, it will often be, well, we told our group that we were going to be switching to Python, and that we are going to do training. And someone in our group said, oh, at my previous company, we had this Reuven guy come in. Why don't you call him? So I can benefit from my, like, the fact that I've been in the market for a long time, and the fact that people move around a lot plays to my advantage. I do some marketing as well. The biggest, most expensive thing I do is that I get a booth at the annual Python convention in the US. Um, can I directly draw a line between that booth and people like corporate clients? No. But can I say now that between the booth and the social media presence and all sorts of other things, people now know who I am? Yeah. And there's just sort of greater awareness and greater sort of street cred. I'll tell you where I don't get leads from, though. So I have this huge mailing list. I have like 27,000, 28,000 people on a weekly mailing list that I send to. Very, very few leads because it's seen as B2C rather than B2B. So even when I ask explicitly, hey, do you want me to come to your company? Almost nothing comes of that. What else? I mean, I know, like, I try doing cold outreach sometimes. So once every 6 months, I say, I'm going to do some cold outreach on LinkedIn or via email, and virtual silence. And that could be because I'm bad at it, and it could be because it's just an inappropriate way to do it, or both. Like, why choose?
Right.
Um,
So for someone getting started, doesn't have like past customers to sort of live off the repeat business, what kind of steps would you recommend people take to break into, you know, some space like that? Like, I don't know, whatever, something. Well, yeah. Just what I've got a Python specific question, but like, what would you recommend? I'm assuming that it's relatively agnostic to the language versus Python specifically, but what would you say to someone who's, you know, maybe, I don't know, Laravel or PHP or whatever?
so first of all, I'd say give lots of talks at conferences, meetups, wherever you can. It's like the perfect way to advertise what you do. And then beat people over the head with the fact that you do training, right? Like, don't assume that they say, wow, that was a great talk, thus I will invite them to do training. They're going to say, that was a great talk, like the other great talks I've seen. So I start, and maybe I annoy people. I mean, I'm sure I annoy people, but like I start every talk I give at a conference with, I do Python training full time. And I end my thing with, you know, thanks very much. If you want me, you know, I just remember I do Python training full time. I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. Again, can I draw a direct line between that and sales? No. But do I know that it happens? Because sometimes I'll ask people and they'll say, oh, yes, we saw your talk. And like, again, it's sort of like the trailer for a movie where they've seen you get up and give a talk for 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. And so the product you're selling is speaking in front of a group and explaining things. That's a great way to do it. I've gotten some leads also from YouTube videos. I have a YouTube channel, and some people have contacted me and said, I saw your videos. I like the way you do things. Come talk to my company. But if and that takes time, like both of those take time. The other thing you can do is call friends and colleagues and say, hey, I know you work at such and such a company. You use the technology that I am training in. And then you can ask for a bunch of different things. That sort of depends on who they are and what the company is. If it's a small company, they'll probably know who's in charge of training. And you can say, can we maybe have a conference call, you and me and the training manager? And training manager is this generic term I use to describe whoever's in charge of that pot of money. Can we talk about what your needs are and whether you need them fulfilled at all? In big companies, they have no idea who these training managers are. And I fall into this trap all the time. I'm like, hey, can you tell me who does training? And they're like, I don't know who does that. Like, they see that email address when they're invited to go to a course. And otherwise, this person could live on the moon for all they know. And so then it's a matter of like, well, can I talk to your manager maybe? Like, can we figure out what, like, you, and your friend or colleague will have a good sense, maybe, hopefully, of how to get you in. And you have enough of those conversations, something will hopefully happen. But it's definitely a numbers game, and it's frustrating, for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned also working through a training company. Is that still a viable path for people, or would you skip that step?
The answer, as always with me, is yes and no. So the good news with a training company is they do all the marketing for you, right? So they have all these leads, they know what's necessary. They're great on that front, and they can fill your schedule. And I'd say that's a great place to start. So what's the problem with it? There are two basic problems. Number one is they'll take half or more of the money, which might be a reasonable trade-off if you're starting off and you want to get your name out and you want to get more practice. The other problem, and this is the bigger one actually, is they will often sign you on a very draconian non-compete. And then then basically you say, well, I'm going to strike it on my own. I'll just call all those companies that I was working with, and I'll say, do it with me and not with them. And I don't know, would you get sued? Depends. Do you want to get sued? How much these things will be enforced, how much can be traceable, big questions. I was very fortunate that the training company I worked with completely and utterly forgot to sign me on such a non-compete. And I realized this and was not about to tell them because I'd sort of planned at some point to go back to doing it on my own. At the same time, there's so many companies in the world, even if you don't compete, like the non-compete can be, you can't go to anyone that you worked with or that's on their mailing list. That latter one is like a deal breaker. But if you say, I agree to non-compete with anyone I work for, there's still a world of opportunities for you outside of that.
Mm. Yep. Yeah, it's a sort of a little bit of a deal with the devil, especially with the like I know it's like a long road. You'd probably need a lot of runway to get it started on your own, and if you don't feel like if you like the idea of training but you don't have a ton of experience with it, then yeah, there's some definite trade-offs there. The thing that keeps sort of looping around in my mind is the importance of repeat business to your current business, and the fact that that would be probably in most cases not an option. You wouldn't be able to have repeat business. Because with development, I found that there was some repeat business, but at least the stuff I did, it was like they had a huge project, you came in and did it, and they didn't need another huge project for a long time. So if they needed anything, it was like garbage support type stuff that I didn't want to do anyway. So I didn't really find that there was that much repeat business when you were building like big software projects. Of course, sometimes you'd get a whale who basically wanted to use you like an employee and would pay you for the rest of your life a not so great amount of money, but I suppose that's a different story. But okay, so that's awesome. Some really good tips there. I'm not surprised. I guess I'm not really surprised, but it was interesting to hear you say that the mailing list functions in a much more B2C fashion, and then the people on the list, they're really not these mysterious training managers from the moon. But let's loop back to that because I want to touch on Python specifically. So how often does it change? It feels like Python. I'm not a Python person, but it falls into that category of stuff. It's like that. It's the same category of when I was learning stuff. Python was one of the ones that one of the sort of like middleware languages like PHP and Ruby, and it was kind of like in that conversation. So it's been around for a while. Is my point. Do you find that it's a lot of effort to keep up with changes in the language, or is it super stable and that hardly ever happens? So your curriculum is really evergreen. Like how much work goes into keeping it up to date and maybe, and I noticed I don't know what pandas is, but I noticed you talking about it a lot so like, what can you tell us in terms of like keeping your material current? How much work is that?
You are one of the first people, if not the first, to realize, wait, these things don't change that often. And that's right, because people are constantly saying to me, wow, how do you keep up with all the changes? And the answer is, it doesn't change that fast or that much. So like And like if you're sort of steeped in that ecosystem, then you see the changes happening slowly but surely. And so what happens is, we come with a new version of Python once a year. So 6 months in advance, I see, oh, okay, these are the things that are going to be added to the language. And it's usually not something essential or big. If it is, so I add a mention of it in my course. But most of the time I can either ignore it or spend time learning it. The other thing is that I've started offering, so I have my regular courses and they're 1 day to 4 days long. And a few years ago, one of my clients at the beginning of the pandemic said to me, look, people are on screens all day. They don't want to do full day courses anymore online. Can we do something that's shorter? And so that was my introduction to what I now call micro courses, which are 90 minutes long on a whole variety of topics. And so new things that are added to Python that I think will be interesting, I just create a new micro course. And then I say to my clients, hey, you want to learn this? I've got a new product for you that talks about just that. And then I don't even have to touch my original base course very much, or I could mention it as an aside. Pandas evolves a little faster, so I have to keep up on it a little more. But again, I also I sort of I do a little bit of CYA at the beginning of my Pandas courses where I say, guys, Pandas is so incredibly huge. Every time I teach, I discover there's some option I didn't know about. So I'm sure you're going to show me something that I didn't know. And sure enough, 2 days into the course, someone says, well, why didn't you use X? I'm like, there's the, there's the
there
proof.
it is.
And next time I teach it, I know to use X. So they're helping me learn it, along with everything that I try to do.
Cool. And those micro courses are real time, but or are they?
Yes.
Okay. So, so you reach back out to past clients and you're like, hey, there's this new thing. I've got a 90-minute micro course on it. I guess this is a super technical question, but what happens next? I mean, are you, have you already gone through some sort of hoop jumping to get into their air quotes, giant pay accounts payable system and approved vendor and all of that stuff, and then this is just no big deal, like your buyer just, I don't know, swipes a credit card on your website and a scheduler shows up? What happens after somebody says, oh, great idea, let's do that?
That is a fantastic question. So first of all, yeah, the jumping through the hoops to be an approved vendor, it's annoying. It's definitely annoying. I just, as part of my cold outreach, I actually reached out to a company like this guy, and I got a response. And the response was, are you an approved vendor for our company? And I said, no, but I'm an approved vendor for lots of Fortune 500 companies. I'm not worried I can do it. He's like, no, I'm forbidden from talking to you unless you're an approved vendor. And I said, can you tell me who I go to? He said, no, I have no idea. So, so that was a little annoying,
Wow.
to say the least. But once you're in their system, then it's easy. Then they usually do a purchase order. So let's go through it. I've mostly done these micro courses with one big vendor where they buy a course or they put it in their system, and it's on condition. It's condition that they can find at least 10 people to take it. So the micro courses actually are more likely to happen because it's a lower cost, easier to schedule, so more people are likely to take it, and it's more likely to happen. My 4-day courses actually from them have been canceled quite a bit more lately, and we'll talk about that in a bit. It's what's happened over the last year or two, and that's one of the big changes. So I say to them, take this day, fill in with whatever micro courses you want. They do that. They publicize on their internal system. If enough people show up or enough people sign up for it, they tell me 2 weeks in advance, yes, this is really happening. And then once a quarter, I send them an invoice for all the courses that actually happened using their invoicing system. Other companies, they just sort of say, yes, we're sure that we're going to be able to do this. Or it's I just met with a group on Friday in New York, where it's their people in their group who are going to be doing this, and so they're like, yeah, this is happening. So even though I don't have a purchase order in hand, and then how do I bill? So usually after the course, I send them an invoice, and different companies have different crazy ways of doing it. Sometimes you just send them an email invoice. Sometimes you have to do it in their own internal system. One company is like, oh yeah, you have to send us a paper invoice to our PO box in Tel Aviv. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And I promise you, this is a company you have heard of. Really and truly, it is mind-boggling that they make me schedule an appointment at the post office to send them registered mail. But whatever. So everyone's a little different. And then they usually pay a month or two later, depending on things. This company I met with in New York said to me, "So how do you do payment? Is 50% upfront and 50% after fine with you?" I was like, "Sure thing," thinking to myself, "Ka-ching, I get it early."
I'm a little bit surprised to hear that you get paid after the fact, especially when there's travel involved and there are. It sounds like it's not uncommon for things to get canceled, and that they wouldn't know until 2 weeks in advance. That seems kind of tight. Is there what is how does that all work?
So my bet has basically been that most courses will happen. And over the years, that's been true. Lately, that has been changing. Lately, as companies have been tightening their belts and reducing their budgets for things, they've been more likely to cancel. And that has been frustrating for sure. But for a few years now, one course a quarter would be canceled maybe. And I'd say, okay, free day, I get to do something else. What happens 3 weeks out of the month, you start to say, this is not good. But usually I'm again, if I have enough different clients doing enough different courses, then it'll sort of balance itself out. Um,
How does the
and getting
how does
paid after the fact,
yeah.
I can't imagine like getting paid from them in advance because of the volatility, and that's just the way they're set up. So I'm used to being paid, net plus 30, net plus 60, and okay,
Mm.
whatever. I'm sorry, you're gonna say something.
Yeah, so but how does travel work? So, you just went to New York. Like, what if you have a free day in New York because they canceled? Or you have a free day where you eat the plane tickets? Or like what? Because I know people are going to be wondering, like, wait, what about the travel?
Okay, so this particular travel was I went to see my parents for the first time in like a year or 6 months, whatever it was. But because I was also meeting with a client, hey, my company can pay for it because it was a business trip. So as long as I can sort of rope some work in there, then it's nice. So and I basically told this client, hey, I'm going to be in New York. Do you want to meet in person as opposed to just on Zoom? So that worked out. But how does travel normally work? The answer is, of course, it depends. So one of my clients, when I was doing a lot of flying to do stuff with them, they had a budget that they said, you buy the tickets, you go to the hotel, you do whatever you want, and this is what we will pay for up to this ceiling for whatever you want. Another client that did the same thing, right? Where basically, and we had to negotiate a little bit because they were in San Jose. And so from Israel to San Jose, it was an expensive ticket. And I said to them, well, I only fly business. Which is nonsense. But if you say it very authoritatively, they might even believe it. And they said, well, that's really expensive from Tel Aviv to San Francisco. I said, well, I'd be willing to go to premium coach, premium economy. They're like, okay, we can do that. So like they earmarked a certain amount when I told them what the tickets would be, and that was fine. But I had some clients where they actually wanted to take care of the tickets, where they wanted to buy them, they want to do the hotels, and then they could go with their preferred vendors and so forth. And that's fine with me more or less.
Hmm. Okay, so it doesn't really have. So if you were scheduled to go to San Francisco from Tel Aviv and it got canceled, it would be you wouldn't be eating the travel. Like you wouldn't have already purchased like plane tickets and have a deposit in a hotel or whatever.
I never thought about that. I think that anytime I was going to travel, we all sort of agreed it was happening. Like they would confirm, yes, this is happening, and then I would buy the tickets. Like I don't think there was ever a danger. Wow, I really never thought about it. I don't think there was ever a danger of I'd get stuck holding the bag for the travel in the hotel. Although I do tend to get hotel rooms on hotels.com with the free cancellation just in case. And since the start of the pandemic, my wife and I have decided like we are willing to pay a little extra to have the refundable tickets and direct flights as much as possible. I mean, especially since I had a horrible set of flights going to Salt Lake City for PyCon last year, where like I missed all of my connections and it was just like abysmal. So yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So what has changed in the past, year, 2 years? And do you think that the changes are more or less permanent, or that it's a phase? What's the word on the street?
I think there are a lot of changes. They're definitely, I'll explain them in a moment. I think many of them are going to be permanent, but the jury is still out on a lot of them. So first of all, companies are, as I said, tightening their belts. And one of the first places they do that is with training. So, and they'll do that in a variety of ways. They'll just cut the training budget. or they'll cut the budget that each individual person has to spend on training. Because at a lot of these companies, they say, hey, you have $2,000 to use for, self-improvement. And if they cut to the 1,500, bad news for expensive trainings. Or it used to be, let's say, that you could do training, you could join a class for $1,000 and not ask your manager. And now that's gone down to $500, and the managers are saying, no way, we're not going to allow this because we need to, crank out a new product. So there's like more restrictions on that happening from their side. With me, they also started saying, like, I got email from one of my clients 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, saying, well, you were going to charge us $10,000 for this 4-day course. We don't have the minimum 10 people to start it. We only have 7 people. So how about you knock off 30% from your price? And if we get more people, then we'll up the price. And by the way, this is a one-time only thing. We will never do this again. I turned to my wife and said, if I agree to this, it will happen every time, like from now until the end of my relationship. So I said to them, no, let's just reschedule for a few months from now. And they were okay with that.
Totally agree. I completely agree. It's like teaching them to haggle.
Right, exactly. The other thing that has changed is I think the flying to different places is basically dead for now. Because these companies have seen that they can, spend much less. They don't have to fly me in, and they don't have to fly their employees. It's sometimes, like I would teach in London or in Brussels, and they would bring people in, and they have to pull up their own employees and expense accounts and all that. And they're like, okay, so WebEx is half as effective, but it's 5% of the cost. Who cares? And so between that and they've started using what is it called, Pluralsight more. They're really looking at the bottom line rather than the pedagogy and the ROI. So I have to definitely say, look, I'm really doing more. This is not the equivalent of Pluralsight. This is highly interactive with lots of labs, and I give good explanations. But it's harder. It's definitely harder than it was even with established clients. And some of them, so one company I've worked with for several years now, that is probably getting like $100,000 a year from over the last few years. So in September, they said, listen, our budget's been cut. We're not going to do any courses in Q4. I said, okay, I understand. And especially then, like I knew they sold a lot to China, like the Biden administration's sanctions on China, like in the chip industry in particular, were going to be hard for them. I was like, okay, I get it. So I emailed them mid-December and said, so how about Q1 of next month? I got a call back from the training manager saying, actually, next Thursday is my last day. The entire training department has been fired. And if and when we ever do training again, it'll be run through our central location headquarters in Silicon Valley. But she said, I don't know if and when that'll even happen. So that was, first of all, I felt terrible for her, right? But second of all, that was, I think there are going to be companies that do that are just going to say, you know what, it's not worth it. And so there'll be, we'll be sort of looking at a smaller number of potential clients. That I think is going to change. That I think in a year or two will come back because they're going to realize, wait, like we can't do everything through YouTube and Pluralsight. But yeah. So that's all been surprising and a little hard. But again, having a whole bunch of different clients and a whole bunch of things, and truth be told, my B2C stuff has definitely helped.
Let's get there in a second. You mentioned something along the way there about, oh, this was for 10 students for 10,000. It's only going to be 7 students. So how about 7,000? How is your pricing based on a butt in a seat, head count, or is it more like up to 10 people, up to 20 people? Do you have a limit of how many people you can handle in person versus in a remote situation? Curious about like how people would think about pricing themselves if they were going to start doing training. Is it like a day thing for unlimited number of people, or like what are the different constraints?
So the answer is, of course, yes. Different people do it in different ways. So it's the two most common ways to price training are per person and per day. And per person, as you said, it's like number of people and seats, and then you have to say minimum of X number of people. I prefer to do per day, and then it's up to them to find that minimum, or they cancel, as I've discovered. And then I set a maximum. And so my maximum is actually a little different per country. In Israel, I say it's 16, and everywhere else I say it's 20. And that's because Israelis tend to be very loud and ask lots of questions. By the way, that is, I'm convinced, one of my corporate secrets of success, because after teaching in Israel the same class several times, I know what questions people will ask. I'm prepared. And so I can go, it's like the debate prep for politicians. You get like the hardest questions there. And so I'm ready for the rest of the world. And people sometimes say, how did you know we were going to ask that next? I'm like, well, your colleagues in Israel prepped me. Um, and so for a long time, I would say, I don't take, so outside of Israel, I would say maximum of 20. And they'd say, really, we can't do more? I'd say, nope, nope, that's it. And then I realized, wait, I'm being dumb. So I say to them, I really don't want more than 20. But if you really insist, it's an extra, I'll call $1,000 per person to participate. And so some companies are like, great, we'll just add a bunch of people because they don't care. And I say, look, I'm telling you right now, I pride myself on individual attention and asking questions, and you are hurting the sort of educational outcomes, but I'll do it if you really want. Usually they end up doing like no more than 5 more people. And let's be frank, online with WebEx, most people aren't participating anyway, and that's basically like easy cash for me. Much as I wish they would turn their cameras on,
Yeah.
they would participate, and they would make it harder, but it's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what about the difference between, so like in person, and I've actually done, certainly not full time, but I've done many in-person trainings back when I was doing FileMaker. Super different subject, but that experience is it's a very unique kind of experience, standing up in front of people in a room and presenting the material. And when they're doing the exercises, you're sort of walking around over their shoulder. If they raise hands, you can like, it's really good. It's the best. It's like the best way to do it for sure. So it's, in one sense, it's easier because you're not fiddling around trying to like get a sense of like where people are and putting them. I don't even know how to do it. Like do breakout rooms or one-on-one people in a group setting. I don't know how to, it's like, it seems very complicated to me and not that effective compared to in person. That said, flying there, dealing with all of the, if you're not a huge fan of travel, but even if you are, like travel is a lot of work. It's a lot of time. If nothing else, it's a lot of time out of your schedule. So you, depending on how you're labeling work, flying to someplace and presenting in person is a lot of work to get there and get home, but it's a lighter lift, in my opinion, when you're actually teaching. And then versus, online, where it's much harder to actually teach it, but you're in your jammies, so you don't have to do any of that stuff. So so I guess a bunch of questions actually. Do you find that clients expect in person to be more expensive, or do they not even bring that up? Are they just like, if you said, well, it'll be 10,000 a day in San Francisco, and they're like, well, how about we do it over Zoom and we only pay you 5,000 a day? Or does that just not even come up?
It only came with one client where like I've been teaching with them for a while, this big company, and I started off doing it in Israel, and then I started like charging them more when I went on site in Europe. And at some point, some manager looked at this and they were like, why are we paying Reuven like 4 times as much just because he's like there? That's ridiculous. Even though they had told me that was okay, like they'd explicitly okayed this budgeting and told me how much their people make. And that was the end, more or less. I mean, we negotiated some amount that was between the two for me to go in person, but it was the beginning of the end for the in person, and the pandemic killed it completely. And I even spoke to one of the managers there, and she repeated that, like, why should we pay you so much more to come here in person? So I now say, like, if it's an American client, I say it doesn't matter whether I come in person or I do it online. I'm going to charge you the same amount, except for the like travel expenses. And I say, I think it is more worthwhile for me to do it in person. You will get more out of it, even though, yes, you're paying for my travel expenses, and we have to do it several days in a row. And if we're doing it online, then we can do this jigsaw puzzle of half a day here, a day there, which is very convenient for many people. But it's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off, and I would rather travel and be there in person for that magical in-person experience that everyone will get more out of. But I think that's going to be pretty rare over the next day or over the next year or two. Even here in Israel, like a bunch of my clients have said, well, let's just do it online because we have 3 different locations. And it's not like Israel's such a big country, like with 3 locations, and this way people can be at home or be wherever. There's definitely though the convenience of I can finish breakfast at 8:59 and at 9:00 turn on, hi everyone, like welcome to the class. They don't have to see like my like oatmeal bowl in front of the screen.
Excellent. Okay, so we've talked about B2C a little bit. Let's pivot into that. So I guess let's start with from a strategic standpoint, like why start doing B2C? And well, let's define that. So B2C is B2B is what we've been talking about. So selling to these big companies, it's sort of a lot of hoops. It's a long sales cycle, but once you get in, you're probably in there for a long time. And that B2C is where the student themselves is paying, right? Like, is that how you would define it in this case? So they're deciding
Yes.
it's their credit card. They're not asking someone to approve it or anything. They're just like, I want to learn pandas or whatever. And okay, so what? So that I'm going to guess that that's like a lot of little purchases instead of fewer bigger purchases, the B2B stuff. So what made you think, oh, I should start doing this? What was the concept there?
I think I just saw an opportunity, and I've probably been doing this for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years already, where I started to like record some of my courses. I said, I already do this at companies. I feel it's pretty smooth. What if I were to record it and then sell it? Right. And I think part of it was like, oh, people are making millions of dollars selling courses online. I can do that too. And that's all true, but it requires a completely different mindset, completely different marketing, completely different everything that I'm still like learning. I use Podia as my platform. And I spoke to the head of marketing there at some point. This is probably like a year or two ago when I really needed to like improve my marketing. I was looking at him to get some ideas. And he told me I was in the top 10% of people on their platform selling. But he said the difference between like the top 10%, the top 2% is still massive. And so that's like the gap that I'm trying to fit now. The thing is, over time, I also realized, okay, yes, like there's way more opportunity to make more with less effort, because if I get the marketing running on automatic like for easily, then the money will just keep coming in. I don't know if calling it passive income is really like accurate, but it's more passive. So I now have more or less, not exactly, but more or less full versions of my intro Python course and my advanced Python course and my pandas course available for purchase, which has, by the way, given me some flexibility with B2B as well, where if a company wants to buy it and I say, well, I'm not available then, or for whatever, I can say, but you can buy my recorded version. And if you want to fill in with some interactions, you can buy some Q&A sessions with me. Sort of mix it around. The thing is, I now see as B2B stuff is becoming more difficult, and as people are interested in learning Python and upskilling, that this is a real opportunity for me. That if I get the marketing right, there are literally millions of people out there who see Python, and I don't think wrongly, as a chance to get a better career, and I can be a part of that. So, I've done a few things. Like in addition to my regular courses, which I've recorded, I've started doing an online boot camp, which is a high ticket item. It's $6,000 per person, like for 4 months. I'm doing the second cohort now. It's a delight because I can finally teach things the way I want to teach them, over time, in depth. Oh, it's amazing. And I'm going to be starting a paid newsletter in about a month on Substack that I think will be cheap, but to a lot of people. And I'm experimenting what works best in what
Yep.
way.
Was there any concern that having your full courses available on Podia would eat into your normal B2B live trainings, or do they not normally see those things as comparable?
They usually don't see this comparable. And I sometimes, like, if a company starts hesitating, I'll say, well, look, there is another option. You can do these, if the scheduling is a problem, if the budget is a problem, then maybe you'll just be interested. Or if you don't have, like, you only have two people who want to do it, then it's not worth bringing me in. Why don't you just buy my recorded courses? And sometimes they'll be like, oh, that's a good idea. And they'll do that. But sometimes they'll say, oh, no, we really want we really want the interaction. So they see it. It's almost like, was it price anchoring, where it's like pedagogic anchoring, like, well, we don't want that inferior kind of class. We're going to go for the Rolex. At the same time, like, no. So I think most of the time it's like not the same people. Yeah.
That makes sense. So I mean, yeah, you said you have, 25,000, big mailing list,
Yeah.
and have you found that that is useful in the B2C realm? Like,
Yes.
okay, so it's not that, because I know you've had, remember the learn Chinese mailing list or whatever. You had like you have this
Yes.
knack for creating giant mailing lists. But monetizing it it wasn't working with B2B, but you found that it is effective with B2C more so.
Yeah. So I've gotten better at it for sure. And I'm still learning, but having this, mailing list at my disposal to do stuff is useful. So about 2 weeks ago, I said, okay, I've gotten a lot of cancellations this month. What's something that I can do with, close to zero effort that will fill in a gap in the market? And let me try to experiment with something new. So I said, well, I have the survey that people fill out when they join my mailing list. Not everyone fills it out, but consistently people say that the thing that frustrates them the most in Python, if they're a beginner, is objects. And I know from experience that functions also cause the problem. So I set up 3 paid Zoom webinars, and I, one functions for newbies, and then objects for newbies in 2 different parts. And I'm going to do them starting like a week from today, or like Sunday of next week, and then 3 consecutive Sundays. And now at the top of my mailing list, when you get it, it says like today's, like literally the issue that's going out today says, don't forget, Sunday of next week, I'm doing functions for newbies. And I can see as it hits different time zones, I'm getting people to sign up. Is it going to be perfect? Is it going to make me, $50,000? No. Is it going to make me probably $2,000 to $3,000? Yeah, that's pretty good. I can't complain about that, because that's roughly what I would get from the corporate training. And then, yeah, so that's sort of one of the things I can do because I have a mailing list.
Yeah, that's fun. So it Sunday. Why Sunday? I mean, I can guess, but
so I surveyed my users, and I said, I've done this twice in the last 2 years, and each time I said, what do you want to learn? Right, it's the old find out what people want to buy, then offer it to them, and they're delighted that you're offering them what they want to buy. So I asked, like, what topics
Shocker.
do you want to learn? Right, and and then I said, what day would be best for you? And in both of the surveys, Sunday was overwhelmingly the favorite. Overwhelmingly.
That makes sense.
Never would have guessed it.
Right. I wouldn't have guessed it, but it does make sense. But I never would have guessed that. I never would have guessed a weekend. I should, though, because I can remember in-person training, it wasn't uncommon for people to say, like, oh, we'd love to take your training, but we can't take all the developers, like, off of what they're doing for 2 whole days in the middle of the week. Like, we're on deadline or whatever.
Right.
And so
also,
I've
these
done
are
trainings on the
individuals.
weekend. Right. Yeah. So they probably have jobs of, they're probably not entrepreneurs, like, working for themselves. And I mean, maybe they are, but probably not. And just because most people aren't that. So, yeah, it makes total sense, but I never would have thought it. That's why I love stuff like that.
It was like I was so surprised. I also was surprised by the topics that they wanted me to teach. And so I've used these live courses both to get some money and to fill out my library of courses. So like I didn't have anything about like a few topics that I thought were important. Excuse me. So I in the fall, like September, October, I offer them as live courses. People bought them, and then what do you know? When Black Friday comes around, there are more courses for people to choose from, and they can buy those. And then I can say my sale includes the latest things that I've gotten, links to all those courses.
So you'd present it like a webinar kind of and record it and then sell the recording.
That's right. That's
Cool.
right. And it's not as good as a real interactive course. I recognize that, but for most people, most of the time, it's good enough. And I think you've had this also. Like I have a very generous refund policy. One person emailed me and said, this design patterns course was the pits. I was like, okay, refund, here you go. And someone else wrote to me the same day and said, wow, I've always wanted to understand them, and this is exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. Some people, it's funny. It's like, I think about, it reminds me of books where people are like, what are your favorite books, in terms of like business books. And I'm like, like a typical example would be like E-Myth. But the thing is, when I read E-Myth, it was the perfect time for me to read that book. And because I've recommended it to other people, and they're like, that doesn't, like, what are you talking about? That book was it made no sense for my business. It was about a bakery. Like this, I don't get it, but it's like a timing thing. So I feel like sometimes when people just like hate a book or a course or something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's probably not bad. It's probably just timing, or they didn't need it. Like they're just beyond it. It didn't teach them anything they needed to learn.
Right.
So yeah. So don't take it personally, people. Well, so so looking forward, I see we're getting up to time. So looking forward, what do you see, is there a trend happening, or is there something, for someone, if you're going to start over, you're starting now, you're still doing development stuff, and you're thinking about adding some training to your, diversifying and adding some training to your revenue. and we're dipping your toe in that space, what would you recommend to, yourself or someone in your shoes? And include, we didn't really get to this, but if you could kind of loop this into the answer, when you're picking the thing that you're going to teach. So,
Ooh,
right, I know this is kind
yes.
of a big topic to end on, but something like I don't know, like it seemed like JavaScript was changing every 2 days for a while there, or like certainly there's a new framework every 5 seconds. So, that kind of stuff, like what should people keep in mind as they're getting started in terms of like evergreen nature of the content, but also tactically, like is B2C or B2B? What should I consider if I was thinking B2B versus B2C? Can I do them both at once, or is that insane?
Yeah, doing them both at once is probably too heavy of a lift, as I've learned, because I thought, oh, it's basically the same.
Same
No, no,
thing.
definitely not the
Right.
same.
Right.
And I think it's probably easier in many ways to do B2C. And I'm saying easy because I'm not saying it's easier because it's easy, but because you've got, you could start a mailing list, you could go on YouTube, you could be on social media for very low amounts of money, and you can even then sign up for, record a course and put it out there and just do like, so picking a niche obviously is a big topic. I was very fortunate that when I first talked to that training company that was interested in me doing stuff for them, like I'd already been training for a few years, and I said, well, I can do Ruby and Python. And they said, no one cares about Ruby, but there's tremendous demand for Python. And that short conversation changed the direction of my career because I realized, okay, I could teach either, but I'm going to go for the thing that is the bigger market. I never imagined the market would be as explosively large as it is now. Like that was just ridiculous then, but it turns out to have been a good choice. But there's definitely a universe in which I would have gone into, let's say, PostgreSQL training for databases. Find something that's big, that's like popular, that people need to understand, that you understand well, and like that first course you do can be something very specific. One recommendation I make to people is security and your favorite topic. Everyone wants to learn about security. I'm, by the way, by no means a security expert, right? So come do security in Python as much as you want. But basically, like every company now is worried about security. And if you can do it, whether it's logging in, whether it's cryptography, whether it's, cyber hacking and so forth, all that stuff, just come out with one course on it. And people will, to a large degree, bid a path to your door, I think. And then here's a trick that I use all the time in my classes. When we go around and get names, why are you in this class? And you will see trends. You will see that a lot of people in a lot of classes, a lot of companies are there for the same reason. And that tells you what your second course should be. And over time, you can then fill it out.
Nice. Okay, so what about one thing I want to add in there? I think that in my experience with B2C, if you want to call it easier than B2B, is that one thing about it, a characteristic of it that is really nice is that the feedback loops are much shorter. So you can create something, launch something, get feedback on it way faster than if you're trying to like work your way into corporate America or corporate world. That can be like a much longer guessing game where you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm not getting in. But with B2C, you can find out, you can talk directly to your buyer slash student. Your buyer and student is the same person. So the feedback loops are way, way tighter, which is, as anybody who used to do web development in the early 90s knows, that was like slow feedback loops, or sorry, software development before the web. It was like long feedback loops is brutal. So, okay. So something
Uh,
like, yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say that I also do that with my mailing list. I use my mailing list to sort of learn topics and write them out. So like, design patterns I just mentioned. So when I said I've got created a design patterns course, I wrote about it for 15 weeks or something in a row on my mailing list. And then I scooped up all the examples that I had there. Voila, I have actually a 2-day course, but I only made it one day. I took the best parts of it. And then I could go out and teach that stuff and use it and know that it was in a more refined format and it was better. So all these things sort of play off of each other. You shouldn't just think, what course can I teach? It's how can I sort of ramp myself up to be able to teach it in in a good way and know the
Nice.
material better.
Nice. Well, obviously we could go for hours. It's great to catch up and thanks for joining us. Where can people go to find out more about your courses, what you're offering, and what you're doing? Get on your mailing list if they're interested in Python or pandas, whatever that is.
The main place to find me is at my website, lerner.co.il. That's lerner.co.il. It will be hopefully changing quite radically in the next month or two as I make it more B2C friendly and have a clear listing of my courses and not have it scattered all over in my mailing list. I'll add also that I have two mailing lists, one of which is like very obvious in public, another one of which is kind of quiet. The main one is about Python and software development. I call it Better Developers. That's on my website. Somewhere hidden in my website, I also have something I call Trainer Weekly, which, like, no surprise, not a lot of people subscribe. And that's about the whole training industry, where I break down a lot of these things and give sort of my latest like struggles, frustrations, good news, bad news, what I'm going through. And then
Cool.
the new one I'm starting on Substack will be Bamboo Weekly. Why? Because that's what pandas eat. If you like that, folks, you'll love the humor in the rest of my courses too.
Try the steak, tip your waitress. All right, that's awesome. So maybe we can dig up that hidden link and put it in the show notes, but we'll link to all that other stuff too. And Reuven, as always, great to talk to you. Thanks for coming.
My great pleasure. This is great fun. Thanks, Jonathan.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly. Bye.